the place. Trip, what are you talking about? Demigods! The ice cream truck signifies a demigod in the vicinity, and considering who your favorite overlord is, Poina is here. Poina? Strange. I would have said Eros. Speaking of Eros, did you know that when Maker first created all of this? He made an arm-sweeping gesture. He loved the natural beauty of it, the majestic mountains, the valleys, the flowing rivers, the vibrant sea. For ages untold he gazed upon his work, but always, in the back of his mind, he thought something was missing. On his desire for a splash of color, he made vegetation, flowers, trees, and grasses of all varieties. An explosion of life bloomed on the planet, and still he felt something was missing. He experimented. What came first is lost, but I like to believe it was honeybees. Fun fact, those first bees didn't have stingers as they had nothing to fear. Still, though, he yearned for more, and animals and fish of all varieties began to populate the planet. It was a wild time to be alive. Every time you turned a corner, there was something new staring at you. Trip, where are you going with this? He stopped talking immediately. I suppose we are pressed for time. Okay, he was bored. The platypus should be evidence enough of that, randomly tossing spare parts together and all. I wasn't sure if I wanted to facepalm myself or Trip. Fine, okay. He decided he wanted to create something in his image. I figured this is where he said, Maker created people. Lord knows that was what had been crammed down my throat ever since my initial contact with Catholicism. Seems we had it wrong all along. Either that or Trip was simply spoken wording the whole thing. He created what people at the time called gods. He made slews of them. Some of the more famous include Zeus, Poseidon, Aphrodite, Hera, and on and on. Where it got a wee bit strange was when he used bits of his own essence to do this. This? This is where it gets weird? I interrupted. They sprang forth from his loins. Follow me? But why an omnipotent being with no equal would need reproductive equipment is something I haven't puzzled out yet. I had no idea what to do with that or why I would want to do anything with that. These lesser gods began to do what everything with tackle equipment does. They used it, not expecting anything other than, Trip, is there any chance we can stop talking about screwing gods? There's a rounded point here somewhere. I swear, if you put me through all of this only to forget where it was supposed to end up, I am going to grow a field of marijuana, then torch it. Trip looked aghast. His hands flew up to his face as he gasped loudly. How dare you! How dare you, good sir! I screwed up. Went too far. He was so upset he couldn't speak. He was stomping around, muttering about the indignity of it all. The entire time we'd been together, that truck tinkling sound had continued to grow closer. How it was not already upon us, I could not fathom. Kidding! I held up my hands in a placating manner. I would never burn up an acre of weed. Like my words had flipped a switch, he was back to his ambling, rambling ways. Where was I? He reached into a pocket and swallowed 5 somethings. 2 were blue ovals, 1 was round and red, the last 2 were yellow and definitely Tic Tacs. Maker's children, such as they were, began to make new children. The birth of people? What? Have you not listened to anything I've said? He seemed genuinely offended. Demigods, Paunch, They made demigods. Maker's Paradise was quickly becoming a preschool filled with hyperactive, sugar-fueled, spoiled kids. As he wrestled with the problem, the demigods grew up and the, trend continued. This was punctuated by him thrusting his bony hips forward. There's an image that I'm going to have to actively work at forgetting. What came from the demigods was... I said nothing. Seriously? This is when you hold your tongue. People? Are you asking or telling? Yes, Mrs. McLeod. She was one of my high school English teachers. I don't think I ever got one of her questions answered correctly, and she made sure to ask me one every day. She seemed to get a kick out of my unease. People. Yes, they made people. By the time Maker took an active role, humans were scampering all over his pristine creation. He quickly put an end to it when he realized that gods and demigods alike were coming down and having their way with a number of us lesser beings. A lot of creatures and godlike beings arose from these unnatural unions, yetis, Hercules, but more importantly in this case, vampires. If you could be punched in the face from a realization, I'd just been slammed. Powena is some sort of distant relative of mine? Have we learned nothing about speaking out of turn? Yes, Mrs. McLeod. Want to know why she was so hard on you? Mrs. McLeod? No wonder you were near the bottom of your graduating class. Mrs. McLeod had a thing for your father. He spurned her advances, so she took it out on you. Mrs. McLeod? I was thinking about the woman. At the time, I was 16. She had to be pushing 40, if not already over that threshold. I suppose she may have been attractive to some, but when Lisa Bennington is sitting next to you, everything else fades away. She was married. Marriage licenses break easier than condoms. Can we go back to Powena? I suppose we should. He looked up and over, like he was hearing the disconcerting music for the first time. Apollo. Powena, I blurted, trying to keep a man with no wheels on a track with no rails. I'm already giving you the Gods for Dummies version, but there are still some major points I'm trying to make. Little-known fact, from Apollo, or rather from Apollo's dalliances, arose vampirism. Whom exactly the culprit is hard to say. Well-known fact is that rabbits learned their frequent and quick mating habits from the gods. Wasn't much else to do back in those days. He was speaking like he'd been there. It was somehow both incredibly possible and fundamentally impossible. The truck was getting louder. A splitting headache began to form at the base of my skull. Maybe it was the truck music, maybe it was the strange influx of information Tripp was feeding me. Powena hates vampires? And I wasn't even one when all of this crap started, or one at all in my other multiple lives, if you're to be believed. This is like trying to teach a fish how to swim. Tripp looked to the heavens for help. I wasn't sure if I should tell him that was already the case, but if I dug deeper into his statement, I understood. It was his way of saying I was the dumbest fish alive, one that had not yet figured out how to swim and would be floating atop the water soon enough. Upon reflection, I was nearly certain that was what he meant. Time is short. He looked at his wrist, where no watch resided, then tapped the inside of his arm like the non-existent thing had stopped working. Powena had, or still has, a thing for Apollo, but he wants nothing to do with her. said she was a petulant child and he wouldn't be sullied by laying with her, which was strange because there weren't many he wouldn't do squat thrust in a cucumber patch with, and Poina is nearly as beautiful as my Stephanie. "Hurry it up, Trip!" I had to shout to be heard over the blaring music. Poina realized if she couldn't have Apollo, she was going to ruin all his creations, tracking them all down, and being as sneaky as she could, she's eliminated them one by one. It's only recently she came across your lineage. Vincent Talbot may be a direct descendant of yours, but your bloodline goes much further back to ancient times before it begins to branch. So Poina wants me dead because she's a petulant, entitled child who didn't get her way with a god? Let me make this clear, Ponch. If Poina wanted you dead, you would be. This is her long game. Destruction by degrees, making it as hard as possible to trace it back to her. This is like the worst-kept secret ever. Can't you just tell Apollo? Have him kick some sense into her? Oh, he knows. The not-so-funny thing about it is doubtful he could care less. So, everything she is doing counts for less than nothing, I ask? What's that? Poina, she's screwing with me for nothing? Who's Poina? Trip had to absolutely scream. All I know, Ponch, is that Miguel is going to want to attack from the east.